It always starts innocently, almost quietly, with a person sitting in front of a screen believing that if they just work hard enough, stay consistent enough, upload often enough, something will eventually click. In the early days of YouTube, that belief was not delusional. It was rational. The platform rewarded persistence, originality, and a willingness to experiment publicly. People uploaded without strategy, without teams, without polish, and somehow those rough, unfiltered videos found audiences. Views felt organic, growth felt earned, and success felt accessible in a way that no other entertainment industry had ever allowed before. You could speak directly into a camera from a bedroom and reach millions without permission. That promise was intoxicating, and for a brief moment in internet history, it was real. As creators uploaded more frequently, they learned the rhythm of the platform almost instinctively. Titles mattered, thumbnails mattered, but they didn't yet dominate the creative process. You could afford to be human, you could afford to be wrong, you could afford to experiment and fail publicly without your entire channel being punished for it. Early creators built audiences on personality and persistence rather than optimization. Monetization existed, but it was secondary. The real currency was attention and connection, not revenue per thousand views. Then the scale changed. Advertisers arrived in force, bringing with them money, expectations, and fear. Brands don't like unpredictability, and YouTube was nothing if not unpredictable. Videos ranged from harmless comedy to graphic content with no real separation. When large corporations realized their ads were appearing next to content they didn't want associated with their image, the pressure began. Quietly at first, then all at once. The platform responded not by protecting creators, but by protecting revenue. And that was the moment the rules of the game shifted permanently. The adpocalypse wasn't a single event. It was a slow suffocation. Videos that once earned money suddenly didn't. Channels that had built entire businesses around YouTube income watched that income evaporate overnight. Words became dangerous. Topics became landmines. Context stopped mattering. Algorithms didn't understand nuance, but they enforced policy with ruthless efficiency. A sentence spoken in good faith could flag a video. A thumbnail interpreted incorrectly could bury weeks of work. Demonetization became arbitrary, opaque, and psychologically exhausting. Creators adapted because they had to. They learned to censor themselves preemptively, to avoid entire categories of discussion, to speak in euphemisms and coded language, just to stay afloat. The platform that once rewarded authenticity now punished it. Growth slowed. Burnout accelerated. Many creators left quietly, not because they lacked talent or work ethic, but because the emotional cost became too high. They weren't just making videos anymore. They were navigating an invisible legal and moral maze where the rules changed without warning. At the same time, YouTube began favoring a different kind of creator. Production value increased. Teams replaced individuals. Editors, thumbnail designers, strategists, and managers became standard. Content shifted from personal expression to calculated output. Watch time replaced views as the primary metric. Then retention replaced watch time. Then click-through rate joined the hierarchy. Videos were no longer judged on whether they were interesting, but on whether they performed according to algorithmic expectations. Creativity became data-driven. Risk became liability. This evolution didn't kill YouTube, but it changed who could survive on it. The platform began to resemble traditional media, except without the transparency. Television had executives you could blame. YouTube had a machine that never explained itself. Creators were told to adapt, but adaptation often meant sacrificing the very thing that made their channels compelling in the first place. Those who succeeded learned to package ideas aggressively, hook attention immediately, and deliver content in a way that felt optimized rather than organic. Some creators thrived in this environment. They understood the psychology of the viewer better than the viewer understood themselves. They learned that attention is fragile and ruthless, that you have seconds to earn it and milliseconds to lose it. They structured videos like traps, not journeys. Hooks became non-negotiable. Pacing became surgical, emotion was engineered. And while this approach produced growth, it also produced a strange hollowness. Videos performed well, but creators felt increasingly disconnected from their own work. As revenue diversified through sponsorships, memberships, and merchandise, creators became brands whether they wanted to or not. Personal opinions carried financial risk. Controversy became both a weapon and a liability. Algorithms punished inconsistency, but audiences punished inauthenticity. Creators were trapped between pleasing a machine and pleasing people, two forces that rarely want the same thing. Many tried to balance both and failed. A few mastered the tension and built empires. Behind the scenes, YouTube itself continued to evolve with minimal transparency. Features appeared and disappeared. Metrics were emphasized and then quietly deprecated. Communication with creators was largely one-directional. The platform insisted it was neutral, but its incentives shaped behavior at scale. What thrived was what aligned with advertiser comfort, not necessarily viewer value. Educational content survived if it was sanitized. Commentary survived if it avoided certain words. Art survived if it didn't provoke discomfort. Over time, creators internalized these constraints so deeply that they stopped noticing them. Self-censorship became automatic. Ideas were killed before they were written. Entire creative instincts atrophied. The platform didn't need to silence anyone directly. It taught creators to silence themselves. That was the most effective form of control. Yet despite all of this, people kept uploading. Not because it was easy, but because it still mattered. YouTube remained one of the few places where a single individual could still reach millions without institutional backing. The barrier to entry was higher, the cost of mistakes steeper, but the potential impact remained unmatched. Creators who stayed learned resilience the hard way. They learned to read analytics like weather patterns, to sense when a video would die before it was even published, to emotionally detach from numbers that once defined their self-worth. What emerged from this era was a new kind of creator. Hyper-aware, emotionally armored, strategically creative. They understood that YouTube was not a passion-first platform anymore, but they refused to let it become a soulless one entirely. They found small ways to inject meaning, honesty, and depth into formats designed for speed and consumption. They learned to survive without expecting fairness. The story of YouTube is not a story of betrayal or salvation, it is a story of scale. When a platform grows large enough to host billions of hours of content, it stops being personal by necessity. The tragedy is not that YouTube changed, but that it never acknowledged what those changes cost the people who built it. Creators weren't just data points. They were early adopters who took risks before there was money involved, who experimented publicly so the platform could learn what worked. In the end, YouTube did not kill creativity, but it forced it to evolve under pressure. It separated those who wanted to express themselves from those who were willing to endure uncertainty, instability, and constant reinvention. The platform became less forgiving, more demanding, and infinitely more complex. And still, every day, someone uploads their first video believing it might change their life. That belief, fragile and stubborn, is the thread that ties every era together. Not the algorithm, not the ads, not the policies. The belief that speaking into a camera might still matter, even if the system makes you fight for every second of attention. As time went on, something subtle but corrosive began to settle into the creator ecosystem, something that wasn't visible on dashboards or earnings reports, but was felt every time the camera turned on. It was the quiet realization that effort and outcome were no longer tightly linked. A video could be researched for weeks, written carefully, edited meticulously, and still disappear without explanation, while something rushed, shallow, or trend-chasing could explode overnight. This randomness didn't just frustrate creators, it rewired their psychology. When reward becomes unpredictable, behavior changes. People stop optimizing for quality and start optimizing for survival. Creators began to second-guess instincts that once served them well. Ideas were no longer evaluated on whether they were meaningful or necessary, but on whether they were safe, whether they fit the invisible boundaries of what the platform seemed to favor that month. Entire creative directions were abandoned not because audiences rejected them, but because the algorithm never gave them a chance to breathe. Over time, this trained creators to think smaller, safer, flatter. Not because they wanted to, but because the cost of deviation became too high. This is where burnout stopped being an occasional phase and became a structural outcome. Upload schedules hardened into obligations. Breaks became punishable offenses. A few weeks away could mean months of recovery, if recovery came at all. The platform rewarded consistency without regard for sustainability, and creators paid the price with their health, relationships, and sense of identity. When your income, relevance, and self-worth are tied to a system you don't control, rest feels like risk. The audience changed too, though less obviously. Viewers became accustomed to higher production, faster pacing, and constant novelty. Attention spans shortened not because people became less intelligent, but because the environment trained them to expect stimulation on demand. Creators felt this pressure immediately. Slow intros died. Context was trimmed. Complexity was flattened. Videos had to earn attention instantly and keep earning it every second thereafter. Anything that required patience became a gamble. This environment rewarded a specific type of thinking, anticipatory thinking. Creators stopped asking, "What do I want to say?" and started asking, "What will people click?" Then, "What will they stay for?" Then, "What won't get flagged?" By the time a video reached the upload stage, it had already been filtered through layers of compromise. Some creators accepted this as professionalism. Others felt like they were slowly sanding down their own voice. Meanwhile, YouTube's public messaging rarely acknowledged this tension. The platform spoke in terms of opportunity, growth, and empowerment, while quietly enforcing systems that centralized power and obscured accountability. Appeals processes felt mechanical. Policy explanations were vague. Enforcement was inconsistent. This ambiguity wasn't accidental. It shifted responsibility away from the platform and onto creators, who were told to learn the system, even as the system refused to explain itself. Despite this, certain creators began to crack the code, not by pleasing the algorithm, but by understanding human psychology at scale. They realized that the algorithm didn't reward truth or depth, it rewarded behavior. Clicks, pauses, rewinds, comments. So they designed content around emotional triggers: curiosity, outrage, fear, aspiration. Titles became provocations. Thumbnails became psychological bait. This wasn't inherently evil, but it was transformative. Content stopped being a message and started being a mechanism. The most successful creators weren't necessarily the smartest or the most insightful. They were the most adaptive. They treated YouTube less like an art platform and more like a constantly shifting marketplace. They tested relentlessly, killed underperforming formats without sentimentality, and scaled what worked even if it bored them. Many of them privately admitted that their most popular videos weren't the ones they were proudest of. Pride didn't pay the bills. Performance did. At the same time, a quiet stratification occurred. The gap between top creators and everyone else widened dramatically. Early success compounded into resources, teams, equipment, insider knowledge, algorithmic momentum. Latecomers faced a steeper climb, competing not just with peers, but with entire production studios disguised as individual channels. The myth of the lone creator persisted, but the reality shifted toward industrialized content. And yet, even in this hyper-optimized environment, something stubborn refused to die. Viewers still craved sincerity. They still responded to honesty when they could feel it. They still rallied behind creators who spoke plainly about struggle, doubt, and uncertainty. The problem wasn't that authenticity stopped working, it was that it became harder to deliver consistently under systemic pressure. When authenticity became content, it risked turning into performance. For creators who stayed long enough, YouTube became less about growth and more about endurance. Success was no longer defined by virality, but by longevity. Could you last 5 years? 10? Could you evolve without erasing yourself? Could you build something that survived policy changes? advertiser panic, and algorithmic shifts? These questions mattered more than any single upload. In many ways, YouTube began to resemble a psychological experiment conducted at global scale. Millions of people chasing visibility inside a system that rewarded conformity while promising individuality. Some adapted and thrived. Some adapted and hollowed out. Some refused to adapt and vanished. None escaped unchanged. What makes this story uncomfortable is that there is no villain in the traditional sense. No single decision ruined the platform. No individual policy destroyed creativity. It was the accumulation of incentives, scale, and risk aversion. YouTube didn't wake up one day and decide to betray creators. It evolved into something that could no longer afford to prioritize them. And yet, despite all of this, creators still press record. They still write scripts late at night. They still upload videos knowing full well that the outcome is uncertain and often unfair. They do it because somewhere beneath the analytics, the policies, and the pressure, the original promise still flickers. The promise that telling a story, sharing an idea, or speaking honestly might still matter to someone on the other side of the screen. That promise is thinner now, harder to reach, more expensive to sustain, but it hasn't disappeared. And that is why YouTube, for all its flaws, remains irresistible. Eventually, the most dangerous shift wasn't external at all. It happened internally, quietly, and almost invisibly. Creators stopped thinking of YouTube as a platform and started thinking of it as a judge. Every upload felt like a verdict waiting to be delivered. Green arrows meant validation. Red arrows meant doubt. Silence meant something far worse: irrelevance. When a system becomes the arbiter of your value, logic erodes. You stop trusting your own judgment because the feedback loop is faster, louder, and more emotionally charged than anything internal. This is where creators began outsourcing self-belief to analytics. Confidence became conditional. Motivation became reactive. A good month meant optimism and expansion. A bad month triggered panic, reinvention, or self-blame. The platform didn't tell creators they were failing, it simply withheld momentum. And in a system built on momentum, stagnation feels like punishment. What made this especially corrosive was the illusion of control. YouTube constantly implied that success was learnable, that if you studied hard enough, optimized enough, improved enough, you could engineer growth. And to an extent, that was true, but only to an extent. Beyond a certain threshold, outcomes were driven by factors creators could sense but never see clearly. Recommendation weighting, audience fatigue, advertiser sentiment, trend cycles, platform priorities. The result was a culture of over-optimization. Creators tried to fix invisible problems with visible effort. This bred a particular kind of anxiety. Not the sharp kind that pushes action, but the slow, grinding kind that eats certainty. Was the title wrong, the pacing, the length, the upload time, or was the idea itself obsolete? When no single lever reliably explains failure, everything feels suspect. Even success starts to feel fragile, like it could vanish the moment you misstep. Some creators responded by becoming hyper-disciplined. They treated content like a manufacturing process, stripping emotion out of decision-making. Others spiraled in the opposite direction, constantly reinventing themselves, chasing trends they didn't respect, performing enthusiasm they didn't feel. Both paths extracted a cost. One led to emotional numbness, the other to identity fragmentation. And then there were the ones who broke. Quietly, channels that slowed, then stopped, creators who announced breaks that never ended, people who once uploaded weekly disappearing without explanation, not because they failed publicly, but because they failed privately. Burnout rarely looks dramatic when it happens. It looks like avoidance, procrastination, a growing resistance to the very thing that once gave you energy. The platform didn't cause this directly, but it enabled it. YouTube's structure rewards output without caring about process. It celebrates results while remaining indifferent to the cost of achieving them. From a business perspective, this makes sense. Platforms optimize for engagement, not well-being. But from a human perspective, it creates an environment where self-exploitation is normalized and even admired. The irony is that many creators stayed because they were successful. Walking away felt irrational. Why abandon something that works? Why leave income, influence, and an audience? This is where success becomes a trap. The higher you climb, the more expensive it is to change direction. Your audience expects consistency. The algorithm expects consistency. Your lifestyle adapts to consistency. At a certain point, you're not choosing to continue. You're maintaining inertia. This is also where comparison becomes lethal. Creator culture encourages transparency, but only selectively. Wins are visible, losses are hidden. Revenue milestones, subscriber counts, brand deals all become public benchmarks. Behind the scenes, creators are struggling in entirely different ways, but the surface narrative suggests everyone else is winning. This distorts perception. People don't measure themselves against reality. They measure themselves against highlights. The longer someone stays in this environment, the harder it becomes to separate signal from noise. Feedback blends with identity. Metrics blend with meaning. When a video underperforms, it doesn't feel like a data point. It feels like a statement about your relevance, intelligence, or creativity. That emotional weight compounds over time. And yet, the system continues because it produces results. Viewers get endless content. Advertisers get attention. The platform grows. From the outside, everything looks functional. From the inside, many creators feel like they're running on borrowed energy. What makes this especially difficult to confront is that there is no obvious alternative. Traditional media is gatekept. Social platforms are volatile. Building an independent audience takes years and still relies on platforms for distribution. So creators adapt not because they agree with the system, but because resistance feels futile. You don't rebel against gravity, you learn to move within it. Some do manage to build healthier relationships with the platform. They diversify income, they slow output, they redefine success. But these are exceptions, not norms, and they often come after years of damage. The platform does not teach sustainability. It assumes resilience and filters out those who don't have it. At scale, this creates a strange paradox. YouTube markets itself as a place of freedom and expression, yet it produces one of the most homogenized creative environments imaginable. Formats converge, pacing converges, language converges. Everyone is free, but everyone is optimizing toward the same invisible center. And still, despite all of this, the machine keeps running because it taps into something deeply human: the desire to be seen, to matter, to be heard. As long as that desire exists, platforms like YouTube will never run out of creators willing to try one more time. The tragedy isn't that most creators fail. Failure has always been part of creative work. The tragedy is that many succeed and still lose themselves in the process.